be seated. We like thinking about the saints and dreaming about heaven so much that we stretch a 3-day feast into a 4th day today as we celebrate again the saints of God and sing some wonderful hymns like For All the Saints and all their goodies like that. What is it that draws us so much into the need to think about the world to come? I Googled books about heaven, and up came a good long list, which seem to immediately become bestsellers as soon as they come out, because people are hungry to know what has become of those who we love and see no more. Has anyone got proof? Has anyone got a vision that is more helpful perhaps and less scary than the book of Revelation, which is the one place in the Bible that we get some extended visions of what heaven might be like. Revelation was written to encourage persecuted Christians way back in the 1st and early 2nd centuries after Jesus. And so that's why there's a whole lot of violence going on. We got people who are martyrs gathering around the throne, and it's really kind of a bloody place. Maybe that's why we got that psalm that starts out real happy and ends up with a 2-edged sword. Things sometimes get violent in this world, and we would like a vision of hope. At least in the heavenly inspired books that I've read recently, I don't see a whole lot of violence getting us into heaven, which is a relief. But ever since Revelation, Christians have wondered, what's it going to be like if I'm one of the saints who from their labors rest? Or as one of my colleagues came out during a podcast, for all the saints who from their neighbors rest, which I thought might be more appropriate. There are some neighbors that we serve a lot, and one day we'll get to rest from that. But what's it going to be like? From Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, if you ever had to read that in school, where he imagines the 3 levels, heaven, purgatory, and hell, or inferno, as he calls it. Really a whole lot of imagination went into that divine poem. He spent 8 years writing that. And if you've ever had to read it, you know he had a lot more fun and creativity imagining hell. Hell is really an interesting kind of place in the Purgatorio. Purgatory is just a long climb. If you like to hike, you might enjoy it. And then heaven is boring. It's boring. Come on, Dante, couldn't you have given us something better to strive for? All right, I'm not going to bet the farm on Dante's vision. Detroit's own Mitch Albom has had a couple of books. Some of them might be on your shelf, including The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, which those people who meet a guy who had a tragic end to his life and kind of explain what it was all about. That's a nice thought. I don't know if I need my life explained when I get to heaven. We've had bestsellers from people who have had near-death experiences when they coded on the operating table, or experienced a terrible coma when their bodies had essentially shut down, and yet miraculously somehow they came back from that and reported on what they thought heaven would be like, what they saw, who they met. It's all comforting. And Jesus says basically nothing about heaven and what's to come. I think people probably asked him. But whenever he talks about heaven, mostly he means what we experience here and now. Blessed are you when you know how poor you are in spirit or in reality. Luke says just poor. Matthew says poor in spirit. When we know that we depend on one another. And woe to you if you are rich enough to think you've got it made here and now. You may find yourself surprised. That's how I read these Beatitudes, because unfortunately, I think probably most of us fit better into the woe category, don't we? I mean, we're relatively rich, we're relatively well fed, we're relatively in good shape financially, and we may not always think, woe is me, and I don't think Jesus wants us to go around thinking, woe is me, but instead to realize that's not all there is in life. The financial stuff, or the emotional stuff, or the traumas, or even the celebrations. In heaven, God is what it is. God is where we're headed. And if you want to imagine that, imagine God being love. God being love. There are a couple of weird stories that Jesus tells about the life to come, which may or may not inspire you. One we had earlier this year, Lazarus, the beggar, and the rich guy who wants Lazarus to climb over and help him out in hell. I don't find that a particularly helpful story, but at least it does bring home that how we pay attention or not to the poor may have a difference for us. And there's a strange story that I'm going to have to talk about later today when I've got a different set of lessons to preach on. The story of a test of Jesus. If somebody marries the same person, it's the seven brothers with one bride story, if you remember that parable. They're trying to test him. She has to marry the one guy, he dies. She marries the brother, he dies. Who gets to be? And Jesus is like, you are just barking up the wrong tree. What this world is about is caring for one another. What this world is about, he tells his disciples in this Beatitudes, part of the Sermon on the Plain. He's on a mountain in Matthew, he's on a plain in Luke, is caring and being cared for, looking out for one another and not getting discouraged, realizing that in this world, the kingdom of heaven begins. It's not here completely, but this is where it starts. And if you want to wonder about who's going to love me in heaven, why don't you start with who am I going to love on earth? And then God will have a nice, wonderful surprise for you. Maybe not an entire surprise when we finally get to where we're going in the next world. I don't need a geography of heaven, and hopefully you don't either, to know that there is something more and something created by God, and we will not be disappointed. How could we be if God's welcome for the saints is the fullness of love? On All Saints' Day itself, when we were together here on Tuesday, I mentioned people who have been terrified to leave this world. I'm not that terrified, and I hope you're not either. I don't want to go sooner than I need to, but when the time comes, I'm not afraid, because Jesus said, all will be love, and I've made a place for you. That's all I need to know. It's this world where we're needed to look out for neighbor, to put God's love into human practice, to be the kind of people who, when we get to wherever we're going with the saints and angels, we'll say, oh, this is even better than I thought. But I had a suspicion. It would be like the kind of church community that Mary Lou reminded us of, that starts here and now, and people who care for one another, and cook soup for one another, and set tables and clean up for one another, and donate things and money and whatever we can to help the ones Jesus said will be blessed in this life by his followers. So may you know the blessing of following Jesus. Because once we get to where the saints and angels are, we don't have to worry then. Our goal and our work here is to make heaven a little closer to us who are still walking and breathing and finding places to know community and relationship and Jesus. In the name of the one who is showing us the way. Amen.
Amen.